Champions of Olympia is like no other game mode in Rise of Kingdoms. You can only bring a total of 6 commanders into Champions of Olympia, that is 3 total marches, and the commanders you bring matter a lot. Especially if you have more commanders at your disposal than me, you will have to make some tough decisions on which commanders you take in. Even for casual games, commanders are important. So today, I will be making the best Champions of Olympia commander tier list for all players. This means that if you have some of the commanders on this list, but maybe you weren't using them, you will now know that they are good in Olympia. If you want to be able to push in the high ranks, maybe get yourself those 10,000 gems for getting the higher ranked rewards, then you definitely have to watch this whole video. Real quick, let's just discuss what I'm ranking the commanders on before we go to the tier list. There are basically 3 or 4 criteria. First of all, they have to be a legendary commander to actually be on the tier list. That out of the way though, if they want to get a high rank, they have to be performing well in Olympia. The skills that go with their commander troop have to also be good. They also have to be probably bringing some form of a debuff to rank higher. The best thing is when they bring a debuff and they also have a very high damage factor and they have good skills which synergize with them. And then the basically final piece of criteria is that they have a good amount of march speed, because especially in Champions of Olympia, there is a big emphasis on how fast you can get to your next flag, or how fast you can get to the Fire Thief or the Apple. So Champions of Olympia has a big emphasis on march speed, and that is another thing I'm also ranking on. Also, with some commanders, I will take in an essence of their tankiness, because in Olympia, sev wounds don't matter. It's all about how much you can tank with some commanders. For example, Richard, even Constantine. Those commanders will probably get a higher rank than you expect, just because they are more tanky. With that being said, let's switch over to the tier list. And we've got 5 tiers. Rank 1 is the Olympian tier. These are the best of the best commanders. These are the commanders which I would recommend almost every single player, if they have them, use them. Then we got the pretty good tier. These are the commanders that are definitely going to work amazingly. They are probably a very good secondary to an Olympian commander, or a great primary if you have 2 marches of one troop type. Then you got the unique commanders. These are like your fairly decent commanders that bring something special that you wouldn't really see with other commanders. Often they are usable or very good in Olympia. They're just not at that tier of the pretty good and Olympian commanders. Then you got your usable commanders. These are the commanders that if you have them and you don't have any commanders from the higher ranks, you can use them. They're going to be fine. They may work very well in some situations, but there will be some situations where they are very bad. And then you got the don't use, which are the basically trashest of the trash. And for most players, if you have them and you don't have to use them, I wouldn't be using them. With that being said, let's start off with Attila. And I'm going to put him in unique. Very, very unique commander straight up, because he just deals normal attack damage. Got no skill damage. He's very tanky and he's pretty fast. So I don't mind Attila, especially as a primary to Nevsky or a secondary to Nevsky, or if you're running an Attila Takeda. Then we have Ethelfled, and she's going straight in the Olympian tier. And you may be thinking, why is that? Ethelfled's not very good. Well, Ethelfled's bringing 3 debuffs, 3 30% debuffs, that being attack, health, and defense debuffs, plus a march speed debuff, all in one. That is an amazing commander to be bringing. It means that you may not have to bring other commanders that have those debuffs, since she has them in her kit, and it's a really, really good use of a slot. Then we got Cao Cao. He's a don't use. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. He may be usable if you have him double relicked, but for most players, he's not at a high level, and pretty much he's going to be pretty bad unless you want to fork out the stuff to double relic him. Then Chandragupta I'm going to put in probably usable, actually. I don't think he's that good to be in the pretty good. Nice debuffs, fairly decent damage. Just, I feel like he's a little bit slower than I would want, and he just is kind of lacking in some of the other stats. Like, he's not very tanky, so he's definitely going to go in that unique tier. Charlemagne is obviously rubbish. I'm going to put Charles Martel at the pretty much top of pretty good. He is a commander that is super tanky. He's got a lot of tanky stats. So he's a great commander if you're running infantry. And if you have a Charles Martel, especially double relic, he's going to perform really well, even towards the top ranks. Because you will know a lot of the top players use a Charles Martel just because infantry are the Olympia meta. And Charles Martel is super tanky. Then we got CJ, who is probably, I'm going to actually put in usable. I mean, he doesn't bring anything very special. So if you have him, yes, he's going to work, but he's mostly damage. Even then, he doesn't bring that much damage. So he definitely gets in the usable tier. Probably one of the best usable commanders, but he's definitely not any ranks higher above that. Same thing with Leonidas. I'd almost say he's don't use, but if you have a Guan and a Leo, I think that is a usable combination. Cleopatra is trash. And then we have Constantine, who's also going in a pretty good tier. You may be thinking, but Constantine does nothing but heal himself. Well, that's the thing. He heals himself. So if you want to hold down an objective and you have the tank skill to call troops onto whichever march you want, Constantine can actually be surprisingly good because he can heal himself 10,000 healing factor. He's got healing factor on his active skill. I'm pretty sure he's got damage and counterattack damage taken reductions. He's a very tanky commander, so he definitely deserves a higher rank on this tier list than most other tier lists. Next up, we have Gilgamesh, and he's only going in the usable. His debuff is definitely outclassed by CPO Prime. Yes, he's very tanky. He's lacking on March speed, though. So if you have him and don't have CPO Prime, he's usable. If you want a tanky Archer March, he's usable. Otherwise, I wouldn't be using him. Then YSS is not good because garrisons don't matter, and the same thing for Zenobia. Those two garrisons are useless because Olympia has no garrisoning. Then I'm going to put Edward of Woodstock also in usable. I would say he's borderline don't use, but because he's fast, if you want a faster Archer March, maybe you have a commander that's not so fast, you could actually slot an Edward of Woodstock in there, and he's going to give him a fairly decent amount of March speed. I'm going to put El Cid in don't use. I might put him towards the top because he does get a bit of March speed when he gets a bit lower, but for the most part, he's just a don't use commander, and I wouldn't recommend using him. Frederick has no March speed and only just a little bit of damage factor nowadays. It doesn't matter. Genghis Khan, I mean, if he didn't debuff his own March speed, he'd probably be in the usable tier, but for the most part, I'm going to put him in don't use. Same thing for Hannibal Barca. Then we have Harold Sigurdsson, and he is definitely an Olympian commander. For Champions of Olympia, he pretty much brings everything you want with extreme counterattack and extreme skill damage and being slightly fast. I think he's got around 15 to 20% March speed, which is decent. So if you want to use a Harold, I mean, he's definitely one of the best commanders you can bring for Champions Olympia. And the best part about it is he is an infantry commander, so he does give you all the infantry skill buffs, which is amazing. Basically, because infantry are the meta, you're going to see them a lot towards the top of this tier list. Bertrand is usable. I mean, he's got some okay damage factor. He's semi-fast, but he's definitely not amazing enough to put him in the unique tier. Artemisia is in unique. If you're in the lower ranks, she is great with Boudica when infantry aren't completely crowding every single player. But once you get in the higher ranks, you will notice not many people are running Artemisia just because she is lacking on March speed. Her damage is pretty good though, and she's definitely better than Chandragupta. Suleiman is definitely a don't use. Cyrus is I'm going to put in unique, but like towards the end. He has a lot of March speed. He's bringing a lot of debuffs, but he's not used in the top pro game. He just isn't tanky enough, and that is one thing you have to keep in mind. If you're running a Cyrus, he isn't too tanky, so you could expect that March to die quite quickly. Then Guan Yu is definitely an Olympian commander. His silence is almost invaluable if you want to run a proper infantry murder ball. And in Champions of Olympia especially, where infantry are the meta, you can expect your Guan to be one of those top commanders. Then we've got Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to go into the unique tier as well. Very good if you're running two Archer Marches and you don't have someone such as Henry. Towards the pro endgame though, he's not tanky enough. He does have the March speed, he's just not tanky enough, so he definitely only gets a usable tier. Ishida is a don't use, I think that's pretty obvious, and Jadwiga, once again, garrisons are useless. Then we got Julius Caesar, and he's going in pretty good because he does give you a ton of March speed and a ton of all damage. He is a fairly tanky commander, and that is pretty much what you want. High damage, which is his all damage, high March speed, and high tankiness. So Julius Caesar, definitely a great buffing commander. If you're looking to be an endgame Olympian player, he definitely beats out some of the other secondaries out there. For example, Mehmed, he's definitely a better secondary than Mehmed, though Honda is certainly a better secondary than Julius Caesar. Then we got Lu Bu, who is a don't use. For the most part, I'd say you don't want to use Lu Bu for very obvious reasons. He just isn't strong enough, and his defense debuff is outclassed by Nevsky. Then we got Mehmed, and he's also going in the pretty good tier, but only for you lower tier players. So if you're not in the top tiers, where you're like in, I think it's Ascendant and Champions Leagues, you don't really need to use commanders such as Julius Caesar. You can use a Mehmed because your damage still matters. But once you reach the top tiers, it's all about March speed and tankiness. So for the most part, he's very, very good from like Everlasting Diamond and below. But after that, you're going to see that Mehmed does begin to struggle a little bit because he is lacking on March speed. And his damage, albeit slightly high, is still very low in comparison to other commanders. Minamoto is definitely a pretty good commander. He's slightly fast. He's a Cav commander, so that is something. But because Cavs are always going to get countered by infantry, it can be difficult to run Cavs with the current infantry meta for Olympia. Then Mulan is definitely in the unique tier, bringing her very, very good buffs. So if you're looking to buff your team, maybe you're working together on Discord voice chat or really any voice chat, then Mulan gets definitely a nice hit in her effectiveness, especially if you're running her with a Trajan, then I'd probably bump her up to pretty good. But for the most part, most players are going to be pretty much running Olympia solo or with one other person, so it can be difficult to get Mulan's full value. Then Ragnar is definitely usable just because Attila Ragnar is a pretty good combo. Other than that though, he is completely useless. Ramses is also usable as like a borderline okay archer primary. He has an okay amount of march speed if he gets hit, but that's also a proc amount, so you can't really guarantee it's going to happen. Though he does have the march speed and okay damage factor and okay tankiness. All round, just an okay commander. Then Richard is going up to the pretty good tier, probably just behind Constantine. I also think that Julius Caesar ranks higher, just because Richard is extremely tanky again. Richard Constantine is a march I've seen run before, and that thing just doesn't die, so if anyone hits that, you can expect that march to not move, not even bat an eye at the damage it's taking, just because they heal so much. And because Constantine can basically heal himself back to max when he gets too low, it's a pretty much invincible march unless you're getting like 20x swarmed. So it's definitely very good if you're trying to hold down a flag at all costs. Running that march, you know as a fact it's probably not going to die. Then we have Saladin, and he's going in the usable tier. I would put him higher if you didn't have Ethelflaed so high on the list, just because Saladin's slow debuff is pretty good, but Ethelflaed also has a slow debuff. You could consider running an Ethelflaed Saladin, and that is also a very, very good choice. But once again, Saladin's slow debuff is already in your usage by Ethelflaed, and you're not really trying to stack debuffs since you don't have enough marches to do that in Champions of Olympia. Then we got Pakal, and I'm going to put him in pretty good. Maybe 2-3 months ago I would have said he's an Olympian, but with the newer Archer commanders and him being slightly weaker than he used to be in terms of like his damage is just not as high as some of the newer commanders, he's definitely not the best pair for Harold. He's also a little bit lacking on march speed and a little bit on the damage, like I said before, though he is still very tanky. So if you want to run up Pakal and Harold, trust me, it's still going to work, and it's still going to be a fairly decent choice for most players. Especially in the lower leagues, you can expect this march to completely destroy, as a lot of the lower league players don't have the marches and the equipment to keep up with a Pakal and Harold, and the damage on that would just be insane. Then we got 2 more garrisons, being Flavius and Jan Ziska. Both of them I wouldn't be using at all for Champions of Olympia. Then Honda Tadakatsu goes to Olympian pretty much for the same reasons as Julius Caesar and Mehmed, except he is just way better. He brings the march speed, he brings fairly decent damage, he is extremely tanky if you have him expertise, and he has a slow debuff. So his slow debuff, yes, I know it stacks with Ethelflaed's, is just so good, plus all the other stuff, especially the tankiness, that if you put him with a commander who may not have an amazing secondary, such as Boudica Prime, even though she does have ZHUGE, if you don't have a ZHUGE, Honda's going to be great. If you want to run a Honda Trajan, it's going to be great. So you can expect Honda to be an extremely good Champions of Olympia commander. Then we also have Sargon, who's going in Olympian. His debuffs are amazing. He is fairly tanky, he is fairly fast, and he's got some shielding for what that's worth. He works with pretty much every infantry commander, and I think that if you're running in Olympia, you probably want his debuff. It's just way too good to really pass up on. So I do really like Sargon as a commander, especially in Champions of Olympia. Then we have Tarek, and he's also going to go in the pretty good tier. He is a commander I see a lot more in the lower leagues of Olympia, possibly because he is a little bit more squishy, like ever slightly, but his damage factor is crazy high, and I'm pretty sure he's got a little bit of march speed in his kit. So he's definitely a commander you could consider using. Especially towards the lower leagues, you will notice that Tarek does start to destroy a lot of those newer players. Then you've got Nevsky, and he's going to go to Olympia, and he is one cap commander that can definitely keep up with the infantry meta. Though if he does get attacked by a full infantry murder ball, you can expect him to die pretty quick. He will still be able to dish out a ton of damage, especially if you have him with a very good secondary or a very good primary. Then we got Henry, and he's definitely in the pretty good tier. He's borderline Olympian because he is extremely tanky, he is extremely fast. He just doesn't have a debuff. If he had a debuff, he'd definitely be Olympian, but he doesn't, so he is outclassed by Boudica Prime, for example. And he is definitely very good if you want to run 2 Archer marches, or if you want to run him with your Boudica, that is certainly an amazing march. But once again, I feel like archers aren't that great in Olympia, and you probably won't expect him to do amazingly, though he definitely will work quite well. Then we got Moctezuma. For obvious reasons, I wouldn't be using him. Heraclius, I also wouldn't use. And then we've got both the range commanders, and I was considering just putting them in unique because they're a bit special, but the thing is they don't move, and you kind of want to be on the move in Olympia. Actually, you definitely want to be on the move in Olympia, especially towards the late game. So they definitely are just usable commanders. They're great to just hold down an objective if that's your goal. You run them plus like a Constantine Richard plus, I don't know, another tanky infantry march, and that objective is going nowhere. But for the most part, they are a commander pairing that isn't going to give you as much value since you basically can't move when you use them. Then we got Scipio Prime, who is just straight Olympian, very fast, amazing debuff, great AoE, works well with a ton of infantry commanders, so nothing more there needs to be said. You know him, and you know that he's going to be powerful. Then we got ZHUGE, who's also going to be Olympian. He is probably one of the only archer commanders who can truly keep up. He does a ton of damage factor. He's got an amazing debuff. He's got health. He is lacking on march speed though, which means he's going to be towards the end of the Olympian tier once I reorganize the list, purely because if he had more March speed, I'd be like, wow, ZHUGE is amazing, but he just doesn't bring it. The same can be said with Boudica, but her debuff is once again amazing, and I think that you're definitely going to see a lot of pro players running a Boudica inside of their murder ball, especially towards not the top tiers since they're all just running infantry, but probably just below the Champions League. You will see that most players will run some form of a Boudica or a LIANG. Then we got Queen DIDO, and I'm going to put her in the don't use. And Minamoto I'm also going to put in don't use just because she has no March speed, and her best pair is Artemisia, who also has no March speed. Then we have Sundok, who also is a don't use commander. For most players, I wouldn't use her because she's just gathering, and I think that's pretty obvious. Then we have Attila, and he is a commander that is going to go into the usable tier. He's great with Attila. After that, though, he just is going to get destroyed. Like, if you go to Everlasting Diamond or above, you're not going to expect Attila to cater to really hold its own weight, considering that it's not doing much damage unless it gets swarmed, and most top tier players won't even swarm it. They will just ignore that march till last, and everyone's running infantry, so you're going to take more damage, and it's just not a fun time past Everlasting Diamond. But he is a really good secondary to Attila, and that's why he gets the usable tier. Theodora is a city garrison, and I think Thutmose, while being pretty fast, is just lacking a little bit in the damage, actually a lot in the damage. His damage is way too low. Tamiris is going in the unique tier. If you don't have a Sargon and you want her debuff, for whatever reason, she is definitely a good option. She does give out the debuff easier than Sargon, though Sargon is bringing a lot more stats. He's very tanky, and he's also infantry, but Tamiris is still pretty good. Then we got Trajan, who's also going to go, I'm going to put him in the pretty good tier. If you're working with a group, he's amazing because he's extremely tanky. He works well with Mulan and Honda, and he's going to be buffing everyone in your group. So if you are working with a group in voice chat, especially towards the top leagues, you will notice that one Olympia team will always have someone who's running a Trajan. Then we have William, and he's also going to go in pretty good for the reason that he is also buffing, but he's also dealing fairly decent damage, and he's got AoE, and I'm pretty sure he has some form of a debuff, if I'm not wrong. He's a very good cav commander, and I can't deny that most top players would be using him. Wizard Tian is trash because she's a garrison. YSG is just going to go in the unique. Great damage, somewhat defensive with his defense relic, but for the most part, he has no March speed, and he's still pretty squishy. Alexander the Great gets the Olympian tier. I know you may be thinking, wow, that's crazy. Why is he an Olympian commander? Well, purely because he is so fast. He's got a shield. I'm pretty sure it's a debuff. So he is great. He's buffing your own troops by giving him that shield. He's debuffing enemies. He's super fast, and he's super tanky with his own shield. He is definitely a commander, especially for Olympia, that deserves Olympian. Plus, he is an infantry commander. XY is getting the pretty good tier with his high damage. I can't say that he wouldn't be good, though I'd say that he's borderline unique just because he is, I feel like, a very squishy commander, and that's not something you want in Champions of Olympia. Then finally we have Joan Prime, and she's just an Olympian commander because she is god tier when you pair her with Nevsky. Now here's the final tier list, starting at Ethelfled and ending in Barbara, in order. This is my personal preference on the order here, and I didn't rank the don't use commanders because, well, you don't use them. For most players, commanders in the unique tier such as Attila and commanders such as Artemisia, if you're in a league such as Everlasting Diamond or below, where pretty much normal people reside, people who aren't crazy about Olympia, you can expect that to be perfectly fine. If you're in Everlasting Diamond or below, you don't have to be running all infantry marches with a professional team, running someone who has a Trajan, someone who is bringing 2 Ethelfleds, stuff like that you don't need to have in Everlasting Diamond. You just need to have decent commanders and decent equipment. After that, that's when you need the pretty good commanders or even just Olympian commanders to sustain yourself and actually push in the rankings. But for most players, if you have commanders in unique or above, you'll definitely be able to you'll be able to use them perfectly fine in Olympia because they will bring you enough benefit where they are good enough for a March slot. Just they aren't better than those top tier commanders, obviously, though they will work perfectly fine. Now, this is like the 3rd time recording this video, 1 time corrupted, 1 time I just wasn't happy with it. So if you want to help support me as a content creator and support the channel, all you have to do is subscribe. We are one of the fastest growing Rise of Kingdoms YouTube channels at the moment, and your subscription really does count. Now, I just want to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.